Hey everyone, my name is Kenyon and I'm a product manager at Zapier. In this session, I'll be talking about how you can make the transition from a novice to master automator. So I'll begin with a little bit about me. I've been at Zapier for over 2 years now, which means I started back before the pandemic. Feels like we've all lived a lifetime since then, but we're all thankful you're able to join us virtually. My first role was with the support team. If you've ever interacted with Zapier support, I hope you loved your experience because the team works really hard to help Zapier users build complex bespoke systems of Zaps that power their businesses. In my time doing support, I helped more than 13,000 customers tackle just about any project you can think of, and I built a lot of knowledge around how teams were able to use Zapier to scale their businesses through efficiency. Today, I'm a product manager on a team whose goal is to make it as easy as possible to manage your Zaps, apps, and account. We're responsible for things like My Zaps, which is where you see all of your Zaps and folders listed. And outside of work, with Zapier being fully remote, I'm currently bouncing around the western half of North America, so send your travel tips my way. Today, we'll cover a few topics. We'll start with the beginning of your journey at Zapier. Then we'll talk about total workflow automation and Zap systems in particular. We'll talk about some signs that you're ready to level up, and then how to talk to your stakeholders about using Zapier. We'll go from the real world and how to translate that to Zapier, and then I'll give an example before wrapping up with some tips and tricks. So what's a Zap system? Let's dig into that. Most people find Zapier when they have a specific use case in mind. They have a problem they'd like to solve, and Zapier can help them do it. It's common to start with a simple Zap, a point-to-point integration with a trigger and action. Perhaps that includes several action apps, but it manages a single process. It does one thing well, but still leaves manual work in other areas. This is what I mean by novice automator. For example, perhaps you're using Zapier to manage your Twitter account. When you add a row to a spreadsheet, the text from that spreadsheet row gets sent as a tweet. This is a single process. Over the years, we've realized that those who find Zapier most useful are able to look at their processes from a higher elevation and build Zaps that transcend single functions to create a cohesive system. This is where most people want to be, but it can be difficult to move from your first successful automation to that next level. Today, we'll talk about how to recognize those opportunities. You'll hear me reference workflows a bit, so I want to make sure that concept is really clear. A workflow is a series of steps to get a job done, both digital and analog. We all have workflows in the physical world to do our job successfully. When translating that to Zapier, the goal is to widen our view of a given workflow to incorporate more pieces of the overall job. In this context, a workflow can and likely will be comprised of several Zaps. Zapier is really about making you more efficient, and to increase our efficiency, we should consider all pieces of the greater workflow, both online and offline. Ultimately, we want to have a series of Zaps each carrying out a specific function. The key is that these Zaps must talk to one another and work in concert. There lies the magic. When done correctly, your system should work in the background in a way that enables you to supercharge what you can accomplish without even thinking about it. So there are two types of systems one might create. The first is comprised of many Zaps doing similar things. For example, you might have 10 different Facebook ads that you'd like to monitor. This may require 10 different Zaps with 10 triggers, though each of those ads may be treated the same with the same action. The second type of system is a complex process that spans different Zaps. Each Zap represents a distinct stage in your workflow, and the Zaps typically use different apps and have a varying number of steps. For the purposes of this session, we'll focus on the second type of system because it's less familiar to most people. If you find yourself building Zaps that fall under that first category though, I'd suggest looking into an app we built called Zaps by Zapier. It's designed to make your life a bit easier. Let's talk about the signs that indicate you might be ready for a system. Now, does this sound like you? You've successfully automated one or a few processes and they work. It's good to focus on one piece at a time. Once you understand how to build one Zap, it's easy to apply those concepts to other areas. These processes don't talk to one another. You're still doing a fair bit of work manually. Your work is split across multiple functions. As a company, you might have several departments carrying out different parts of a process like marketing, sales, customer support, finance, fulfillment, and more. These other functions rely on software or apps, and Zapier supports those apps. If there's no official app, perhaps you can use webhooks by Zapier or build your own integration using the developer platform. If you're unfamiliar, check our help center or talk to the support team. We also have a list of Zapier experts you can hire to help with particularly complex work. As long as there's an API, it's probably possible. And lastly, your work may include analog pieces that don't seem inherently automation friendly. So human intervention, perhaps someone needs to do something manually or make a decision. Time is a time delay or waiting period built into the process. Or more generally, things are happening offline within a greater workflow. Something physical occurs that Zapier can't detect directly. Let's move on to how we'd actually bring this work to life. There are a couple of ways that this plays out in practice. Some teams have a dedicated person focusing on automating with Zapier. This person takes requests from others and handles all of the building and maintenance. The beauty of Zapier is that often large teams can benefit without even knowing. Others expose the entire team to Zapier so that everyone is empowered to use the tool. This is how we work at Zapier. Everyone has both a private account and access to our company account. Automation is a core value for us, and it's a constant part of our conversations. The direction is up to you, but the builder will need to understand the process enough to move forward. The first thing we should do when working on a new project is translate the digital components of that workflow to triggers and actions. These are the building blocks of a Zap. As we probably know at this point, a trigger is what kickstarts the process. Zapier listens for this behavior and uses it to run the automation. The action is what happens from there, and a single Zap can include as many actions as you'd like. I like to get clear on the goal of the Zap and then use the app directory to confirm the functionality I'll need is available for each app. When planning out a system, think in terms of triggers that you'll use. These are like checkpoints in the process, so they anchor our work. Triggers are an input for Zapier and represent the information we'll be able to access. Because of this, triggers equate to the gaps in a workflow. If we need to get data from an external source into Zapier, it often means we'll want to end one Zap and start a new one. In my experience, this is the toughest concept for people to grasp. Automation is all about the flow of information from one system to another. If things are really complex, you could try jotting it down. Just pull out a piece of paper and draw a quick diagram to visualize how everything fits together, like I've done on this slide. Let's revisit that earlier example of using Zapier to send tweets when you add a row to a spreadsheet. We want to level up here and build a process that does more. If we zoom out, we can see the team is pulling those tweets from an RSS feed. An RSS feed gets updated as new articles are added to websites within the feed. Ideally, they'd like to chuck them into a spreadsheet as they come through and use that sheet to manually review and vet the content before tweeting. In other words, what's been built is a starting point, but we have room for improvement. So I've started by creating a list of needs on the left as my mind sees it. These needs become triggers and actions. From here, I search for the natural gaps in the process. In other words, the point of human review and places where we'll need to get new data into Zapier. That's how we'll determine how to structure our Zaps. That gives us 3 key events. First, we'll trigger when an item is added to a feed and place that item into a spreadsheet. Notice the feed item is our trigger in Zap 1. After this, the Zap ends. We need to wait for someone to review the spreadsheet and approve the content before tweeting. Our second Zap picks up from there and triggers when the spreadsheet item is approved. We'll do that by checking a box in the row and design our second Zap to handle the tweeting from that point. We all think differently, but I'd encourage you to find your brainstorming style. This can all sound fairly abstract without a real use case, so let's use an example to illustrate these concepts and really dig in. Meet Tabitha, a marketer at Fresh Juice, which sells organic juice subscriptions through their website. Like many businesses, they heavily invest in social media marketing to grow their revenue. As a marketer, Tabitha is responsible for getting their product in front of potential customers and generating interest. She used to spend quite a bit of time manually transferring her Facebook leads to her CRM so they could track them. But after finding Zapier, she was able to automate that entire process and free up hours of time each week. Her first Zap runs whenever a lead submits their information after seeing an ad Tabitha posted on Facebook. It then adds that person to Tabitha's CRM, Salesforce, and sends that person a customized email. Tabitha loves this process. It's helped drive sales and cuts down on tedious admin work. She's pretty happy, but she knows she could be utilizing Zapier for more. She understands Zapier supports thousands of apps, including most of the ones she and her colleagues use, but she has trouble moving past her initial Zap and applying the same automation mindset to other problems. Her colleagues have heard about Zapier, but haven't taken the plunge themselves. Tabitha seems to have found a really useful solution to her problem, though, so they ask her to help set up a preliminary system so they can all benefit. To start, Tabitha decides to perfect her own Zap. Not all leads respond to her email, so she wants to send them a few reminders. She adjusts her existing Zap by adding a few delays and some extra email check-ins designed to pull all of those leads deeper into the funnel. This is a fairly simple process using the Delay by Zapier app. Her updated Zap looks like this. It triggers when a new lead is received in Facebook lead ads. It then searches for an existing lead in Salesforce and creates a new one if needed. Then she sends an email introducing their juice service. After 2 days, the Zap sends another email. And then 3 days from that point, the Zap sends one final email. Tabitha works with Jordan, the sales manager. Jordan's job is to convert interested leads into paying customers. When someone responds to one of Tabitha's automated emails, she forwards that email to Jordan's team. They'll review, update the lead status in Salesforce, and then work with that lead to schedule an intro call. This is something we can automate with a few modifications. As the Zap builder at Fresh Juice, Tabitha checks in with Jordan to make sure she understands his needs. Then she breaks his process into triggers and actions. This is a case where human approval is pretty important. Not all email responses, leads in this case, are genuine. Before taking any action, the team must vet the response to confirm it's valid. Our process will be designed around that requirement. In our first Zap, we'll watch the responses to Tabitha's emails and send them to Slack. The trigger here is the new email matching search in Gmail, which is a flexible option for narrowing in on specific emails. Then we'll send a channel message in Slack. We'll use that Slack message as a mechanism for human approval. We use this trick all the time in Zapier, and it can be helpful to route information into a single place so the team doesn't have to go searching. For our second Zap, the trigger is a reaction to a message in Slack. Our first action is to find the Salesforce lead record. Then we'll update the lead status in Salesforce. And finally, we'll respond to the email with a Calendly link so they can book time for themselves. This demonstrates two helpful concepts. The first is that when something happens outside of Zapier that acts as a hindrance to automation, such as the need for human approval, think of ways to split your Zap in two. Here we decided to handle the approval on Slack and use the reaction as a method for continuing the process. If you're unfamiliar, reactions are those emoji reactions you can add to individual Slack messages. You may need to look for new tools that support your automation goals. Jordan was handling scheduling manually via email. Calendly is an example of a new tool that can be added to reduce your work. Customers can select their own time rather than working back and forth over email. Now the team is able to manage incoming communications with a single button in Slack, and intro calls are automatically added to their calendars based on the lead's availability. The team's already made good progress in automating work through two departments, marketing and sales, but they're not done. Tabitha employs the same strategy and continues to talk to her colleagues about the processes they use that might be good candidates for automation. Once Jordan closes a sale, Matteo, the operations manager, is responsible for getting the product to the customer. He wants to make sure the item arrives on time, intact, and exactly how the customer expects it. Currently, this revolves around the status of each lead in Salesforce. Once the team makes a sale, they update the status of the lead in Salesforce to closed. Matteo's team looks out for those, creates an order in their fulfillment service ShipStation, and their warehouse processes that order by shipping the first juice subscription to the customer. Because this involves manual review, it's not instantaneous, and things can be missed on occasion. As you can imagine, we can automate this too. So we build this app, the trigger of which is that once the call ends, a sale is made, and the Chrome extension trigger allows that sales team to finalize the sale right from their browser. Then we have a few actions. The first is to find the Salesforce lead record. Then we'll update that lead status in Salesforce. And finally, we'll create that order in ShipStation. There's an enhancement here for the sales team. And Zapier has a Chrome extension that allows you to start a Zap on command with the push of a button. By introducing this, it saves the sales team from having to log into Salesforce. It also cuts out the possibility of human error from the operations team, which is a win-win. With this in place, Matteo can focus on some much needed operational improvements rather than administrative work. By now, that lead collected through Tabitha's marketing efforts is a customer. And like any business, customer satisfaction is key to Fresh Juice's continued growth and managing it can be cumbersome. Yasmin leads the customer service team, and her goal is to make sure all customer issues are addressed in a timely manner. As the voice of the company, customer service is a critical function. Yasmin believes a key piece of her job is to gather feedback from her customers and make sure it lands in front of the right people so that they can improve their operations. Often, she has to ask for that feedback, but doing so at scale is prohibitive. When Yasmin hears about the ways in which her colleagues have used Zapier to lighten their own workloads, she immediately sees some ways in which she can also use it to make herself more successful. Yasmin wants to give Zapier a go herself, so she joins the company's account and gets building. In her first Zap, the trigger is that an order is shipped in ShipStation. Then we wait 4 days before sending a physical thank you card via an app called Thankster. We wait another 2 days, and then we send an email asking for a review. These days, analog communication can be refreshing. Yasmin decides to send each customer a thank you card a few days after sending their first G subscription. A couple days later, her Zap sends that same customer an email asking for their feedback via the company's Google My Business profile. When that feedback starts rolling through, though, it can create a lot of noise. Yasmin wants to pay extra attention to negative feedback because it's often an opportunity to improve their services. But it's also useful for the team to know what they're doing right, so she builds a Zap to segment feedback and handle it appropriately. Paths allow us to build conditional logic and act differently depending on a given parameter. For example, we can look at a review and segment certain ratings from others and ignore the rest. In Yasmin's second Zap, the trigger is a new review in Google My Business. Then we have an action using paths. We segment out 1 and 2 star reviews as well as 5-star reviews. In path 1, 1 and 2 star reviews go directly to Slack, where the customer service team will reach out to each customer directly. In path 2, 5-star reviews go to an Airtable, and each quarter, Yasmin will read through it and create a report to circulate around the company. Paths are similar to filters in that it allows us to set rules for when and if the Zap should continue. If those specifications are met, the Zap runs the actions that follow. Paths differ from filters, though, because we can add up to 5 unique conditions, and the Zap will run any actions that are relevant. It's a great way to bake in really complex logic. These 2 Zaps go a long way towards helping the customer service team understand how their customers are feeling. Let's recap. Tabitha's experience using Zapier for her own work was able to help the rest of the Fresh Juice team supercharge their automation to cover more departments. If we look at where we began with a simple Zap used to add leads to their CRM, things have evolved quite a bit. They now have 6 Zaps covering 4 company functions. They were able to get here by leveraging Tabitha as the automation expert. She spoke with each functional leader to understand their current processes and then translate them to the triggers and actions needed to perform the automation automatically. They broke their Zaps around natural stopping points, not necessarily teams or jobs. Work that began with one team translated to things the next group needed. For example, sales triggered a Zap for operations by pushing a button in Chrome that triggered a Zap and changed the lead status in Salesforce. Follow the flow of information. Lastly, the team leveraged new tools like Calendly and Zapier's Chrome extension to support their automation goals. Before we wrap up, I wanted to run through a few tips and tricks that might help you get building. Consider Zapier a key process management tool. As you think through processes, Zapier should come up early in those conversations. Get everyone on board and understand what they need to succeed. Help others understand the power of Zapier so they can take advantage of it as well. If you have a team or company level subscription, you can add more users to your account so you can build collaboratively. This is what our friends at Fresh Juice did when Yasmin wanted to build herself. Alternatively, consider electing someone as a Zap builder and route all requests through them. At Zapier, we think automation first. When I'm thinking about a new process for my team, someone generally has to manage it. A great candidate is often a robot. If I find myself doing something daily or even monthly, it's often worth taking the time to automate that job off my plate. The investment in the process generally pays off pretty quickly, and my to-do list is lighter for it. Stay organized. As we build more Zaps, it's critical to keep them organized and tidy, so it's clear what the process is doing. Consider a scenario where you leave your role and someone else needs to step in, or even yourself a year down the line. Zapier is generally set it and forget it, but you may have to come back to do some maintenance in the future. Use folders and naming conventions to keep things clean. At Zapier, each team has a folder that matches the name of the function in its Slack channel, which is our virtual office. Accounting Zaps can be found in accounting, for example. Give each Zap a clear title that explains exactly what it does. If it's a component of an overall system, numbering the Zaps can be really helpful. Write a short but thorough description that lives on the Zap. Someone who isn't familiar with what you've done should be able to look through your account and understand at a high level. You can add a description from the Zap editor or the Zap details page. Bonus points, if you really want to be clear, it could be useful to document the entire system by listing all of the Zaps and their purposes. Pick your favorite documentation tool for this, it doesn't really matter. We've seen some teams create really detailed training documents that show others what Zapier does for them. My team thinks a lot about the ways in which you're able to organize and manage your Zaps, so if you're ever interested in chatting about things that might make your life easier, get in touch. My contact info can be found at the end of this presentation. Businesses of all sorts rely on Zapier to automate critical business processes, and we take that incredibly seriously. That said, when dealing with automation, be prepared for the occasional mishap. Perhaps there was an issue with the data sent through one of your Zaps, or a service you use has an outage. Things like that can prevent a Zap from working properly, so it's worth taking the steps to mitigate those problems at the start. Consider where things might go wrong and plan for this. A really common scenario involves form apps, the kind that allow people to fill out a form of customized questions. Let's say you have an order form that's used to fulfill requests. If you build a Zap that relies on a critical piece of information from that form, like a delivery address, and that information isn't provided by the customer, the Zap won't be able to do its job. We can mitigate this by making the necessary fields required, not optional. We've also seen teams build error catching directly into their Zaps. You might decide to use paths to tell the Zap how to behave if certain information is omitted, like reaching out to the customer and asking them to resubmit their request. I could give a whole presentation on this topic alone, but it's worth anticipating issues from the start. A simple way to stay in the loop is to make sure the email address on the account is one you check regularly. Many companies create a specific Zapier email address or use a generic inbox that no one checks. Since we default to communicating with the address on your account, that can mean you miss critical notifications about your Zaps or billing issues. If you must use a general inbox, set up an inbox rule to have those forwarded to your personal address. You can also use an app called Zapier Manager to monitor your Zaps and send custom alerts to your messaging platform of choice, like Slack or Microsoft Teams. If you'd like billing notifications forwarded to a specific person, say an accountant, this can be done from the account settings on the same page you manage your payment method. I'd also suggest getting familiar with your Zap history pages. It's the ultimate source of truth when it comes to investigating problems because it contains a record of everything your Zap has done. If one of my Zaps behaves unexpectedly, this is always where I start by retracing its steps. Let's run through the highlights of what we've covered today. Expand your thinking when it comes to workflows. Remember to account for things happening both online and offline when thinking about how you might use Zapier more effectively. If you're on a larger team or don't have intimate knowledge of all the processes you'll be automating, be sure to talk to stakeholders to understand their needs. As a company, decide if you'll elect one person to manage Zapier or give each person on the team direct access. If it's helpful, write things down. It can be a powerful way to brainstorm. Think about Zapier early when planning out new processes. If you're interested in learning more about the practical aspects of implementing Zap systems, I'd recommend attending the next session, Tips and Tools for Powerful Workflows. There, my colleague Caleb will run through some of the best features and apps to use to build more powerful workflows. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I really hope you took something useful away. If you have questions about the practical aspects of applying any of these concepts to your own work, reach out to our wonderful support team. We'd love to help you do more with Zapier. Enjoy the rest of ZapConnect, and I'll see you next time.